Tech Revision with Mrs. Swanee Pooh. Hi everyone, today we are going to be talking about polymers, all of the different plastics that you need to know for the A-level exams. So straight away, there are some stock forms that you need to be aware of. So just like in previous videos, there's stock forms of metals, stock forms of woods. There are different types of stock forms of polymers. So polymers come in the following stock forms. You can buy it in sheet. So top left, you can buy it in sheet. An example of that is acrylic. We buy acrylic in sheet form for laser cutting. It can come in granules. The granules are quite often used in injection molding and things like that. They are fed into the machinery, melted down, injection molded into multiple different products. You can get polymers in powder form, and quite often powdered polymers are used to dip coat metals. So for example, you might heat up the handle of some pliers, dip that into powdered polymer, and that creates kind of like a handle and a plastic coating on that part of the product. Polymers also come in foams. So bottom left, you can see you can have different types of expanded foams. One example is Plastazote, which is the foam used for pool floats. Polymers can come in films, so really thin film, like cling film, things like that. And they can also come in filament. So filament is used in 3D printing. You can get ABS, PLA, a few other different types. But you can also get polymers in different sort of extrusions, like rod and tube and square section, and all of those different things as well. So it's important that you are aware of the different forms that polymers come in. This is the list of polymers that you need to be happy with. So you can see it's split into three main areas: thermoplastics, you've got thermosetting plastics, and elastomers. There's some really key things that you need to know, the differences between those different sections. Thermoplastics, remember, can be heated and go soft, soften, can be molded into multiple different types of shapes, and the good thing about them is they can be heated again and molded again, and that process can happen over and over. This means that they can be recycled, and it makes them really suitable for processes like injection molding, blow molding, extrusion, all of those processes that use heat. So thermoplastics, those are thermoplastics you need to know. Thermosetting polymers, or thermoset plastics, these ones have almost like a chemical reaction that happens that causes them to set. So these, once they have set, once they've been molded once, they cannot be remolded. They will not soften. You'll probably think, well, what happens to them when you add heat? They actually burn and char rather than softening. So they're quite useful for applications where things need to be quite resistant to heat. And then we've got elastomers. So things like silicone, neoprene, different types of rubber, obviously used in a variety of different products. So you may have done this this kind of task. You may have done this task in lessons before with me, or maybe you haven't. But you might want to pause the video at this point and try and think about which of the thermoplastics, thermosetting polymers, and elastomers these pictures represent. So feel free to pause at this point. Feel free to obviously pause and add those in if you want to. We're going to go through this now really quickly. High density polyethylene is the like bleach bottles, quite commonly used for bleach bottles because it's got good chemical resistance. We've got natural rubber, is really resistant to water. We are going to go through these polymers in a little bit more detail in a moment, but just if you've had a go at this activity, I thought I'd show you the results, the answers. We've got PVC, and PVC can come in two different forms. You get the flexible form. It's resistant to weathering, good for things like garden hoses, and you also get the stiffer more rigid version, which is on the bottom row, which is used for things like guttering and window frames. It's that white PVC plastic. This one, top right, is melamine formaldehyde, very commonly used for kitchen surfaces, very hard wearing. The next one is epoxy resin, the saviour of every A-level project across the land. Epoxy resin fixes everything. It's got high strength, good rigidity, and in some forms used as an adhesive, and in other forms used almost to cast things in. Polypropylene, used for a variety of different products, but normally products that need some kind of fatigue resistance, so things that are going to flex over and over and over, and you need some resistance to that. The Carlite is acrylic due to the optical clarity that you can get through the material. It can be completely clear, almost like glass, so that's kind of why it's used in those kind of applications. The yogurt pot is HIPS, high impact polystyrene. It's got good impact resistance. Urea formaldehyde, it's got good heat resistance because it's a thermoset plastic or polymer. We've got nylon. This one has a low coefficient of friction, so it doesn't have too much friction against itself, meaning it's good for things like gears and things that need to be in contact with each other, but you don't want too much friction or resistance. Also, nylon is very lightweight, which makes it really good in mechanisms that you're trying to keep light. The Lego is made using ABS, which has a low melting point. It's tough and it's strong. Low density polyethylene is used for plastic bags. It's low cost and it's quite tough considering it's how light it is and how thin the material is. This one is a bit of an odd picture, but it represents you kind of like using a layup method, which is polyester resin over the top of glass fibre to create glass reinforced plastic. And polyester resin has a great property. It's UV resistant, which makes it really suitable for outdoor use, things like kayaks and boats. Neoprene is a very durable type of synthetic rubber. It stays flexible in high and low temperatures, making it really suitable for lots of different applications, but quite often for things like wetsuits, where you might have quite drastic changes in temperature. Butadiene rubber is a synthetic rubber. It's got really good wear resistance. Obviously, you don't want your tyres wearing out instantly, so it's got good resistance to wear. PVC, UPVC, which means unplasticized PVC. And basically, this is the stiffer, more rigid version of PVC used for window frames, and it's very resistant to weathering, making it suitable for outdoor use. And silicon has low thermal conductivity, which makes it great. It's a great insulator, good for things like oven gloves and all sorts of things like that. So those are all of the main types of polymers that you need to be aware of. And we've kind of spoken all the way through about which ones are thermosets and which ones are thermoplastics. So very quickly, if it's a T, it's a thermoplastic. So HDPE is a thermoplastic. Natural rubber. Rubbers tend to be thermosetting, just so you're aware. So you cannot heat up rubber and reshape it. That's why TPE, which is called thermoplastic elastomer, is a much more environmentally friendly option to these rubbers, because you can actually heat it back up again and remold it. So things like neoprene, silicon, butadiene rubber, natural rubber. Well, natural rubber is okay because it's coming from a natural source, but a lot of the synthetic rubbers cannot be reused. PVC is a thermoplastic. Melamine formaldehyde is a thermoset. Epoxy resin is a thermoset. Polypropylene, acrylic, and HIPS are all thermoplastics. They can be recycled. Urea formaldehyde is a thermoset. Nylon is a thermoplastic. So's ABS. So's low density polyethylene. Polyester resin is a thermoset, and so is neoprene. Rubber is also a thermoset. UPVC is a thermoplastic and silicon is a thermosetting. Okay, so you need to be aware of which category they fit into, and always think about the environmental impact of those differentiations. So if it's a thermoplastic, it can be recycled, it can be reused. If it's a thermoset, it's difficult to dispose of, it might end up in landfill, it might have to be burnt, which could give off harmful chemicals into the environment. Also, the thermoplastics are much more suitable for the majority of commercial manufacturing processes like injection molding, vacuum forming. They work easily with those processes, in contrast to urea formaldehyde and thermosetting plastics, which use something called compression molding, which is a different type of manufacturing processes used specifically for thermosetting. Right, so thermoplastics, we're going to go through these in just a little bit more detail, just so you can make a few notes as we go through. Acrylic. This thermoplastic is used predominantly for things like car light units, so on your car, the covering on your car lights, used for bathtubs, bizarrely, quite often vacuum formed, unless you've got a really posh ceramic bath. It's often used in shop signage, so there's an example there on the screen, and also point of sale displays and stands in shops. Quite often it would be line bent, so just heated and bent into simple sort of geometric net shapes, but it's quite hard, it's quite a hard material. It's got excellent optical quality, and I've realised that I've put hard but also that it scratches easily, which is a little bit contradictory. But the main thing that you need to remember about acrylic is it's got this excellent optical quality, meaning that you can get really, really clear finish, which is important for things like the car lights, for signage where lights might need to shine through. It can also be easily laser cut, which is a very easy to use and effective process for cutting acrylic sheet. So that is acrylic. Next one is this one, high impact polystyrene, quite often used in children's toys, things like yogurt pots, fridge liners. The inside of your fridge is quite often made from high impact polystyrene. It's tough, it's hard and rigid. These are the two important properties that it has that makes it really suitable for these kind of products. It's lightweight, important for a kid's toy, excuse me, but also it's impact resistant, because imagine those kids, I know my daughter used to throw her toys around, they used to drop, they used to hit hard floors. You want them to be impact resistant, just like with a yogurt pot, even though they always seem to crack. You want them to have some resistance to impact. So that is high impact polystyrene. High density polythene or polyethylene. This material has a really important property. It's got excellent chemical resistance. It's one of the few that has such a good resistance to a range of different chemicals. So cleaning chemicals, soaps, detergents, all those kinds of things will be packaged in blow molded bottles like the ones on the screen here from high density polythene or polyethylene. And another really good example of a product made using this material is things like pipes that might need to transport water or chemicals, and also laundry or washing up bowls, which may come into contact with detergents, bleaches, all those different types of things. So high density polyethylene, washing up bowls, bleach containers, shampoo bottles, all of that sort of stuff is high density polyethylene. Polypropylene. I go on and on and on about this. Really, really important property of polypropylene is its fantastic fatigue resistance. So the Blu-ray case here is a really good example. You've got the hinge in the middle of the case is actually made from polypropylene. They haven't had to attach a mechanical hinge or any other type of material there to create that. The hinge is made from the plastic. And not all materials would be able to do that. If you think how many times that case has to open, close, eventually other plastics or other materials could kind of stiffen and eventually break. You'll notice that with some materials, like the pen lid, when I used to be bored at school, you bend it, and eventually it does break. Polypropylene has got really good resistance to this. So it's quite often used in toys that are going to get a lot of bending or folding or whatever, things that need to flex. DVD, Blu-ray cases, bottle caps, if you think how many times you have to tighten and untighten, it's coming under quite a lot of force and fatigue. You don't want that to be breaking down. Chairs and school chairs are often made from polypropylene because the amount of time that you need to sit down on them, how often they will need to flex. So polypropylene, the main thing that you need to make sure that you remember is that it's got that really good fatigue resistance, along with a lot of other good properties that plastics have. They're lightweight, it's quite tough, so it's going to protect the product inside, for example, with the Blu-ray case. But polypropylene, try and remember that it is fatigue resistant. Polyvinyl chloride, PVC. So the two different versions of PVC. You've got the top right, which is called unplasticized PVC, which is used for window frames. So in your house, unless you've got some really posh aluminium frames or something really posh like that, you will likely have this white plastic. That's UPVC. You may have also a garden hose outside. That is just PVC. So it comes in that flexible state, but also you can add something called a plasticizer, which makes it flexible, and the unplasticized is not, it doesn't have that additive, meaning that it's much stiffer and harder. Okay, so it's low cost, it's got good chemical and weather resistance. So if you think they'll be cleaned with chemicals, most likely they'll come up against cold, rain, heat, all those kinds of things. So that's PVC, and just to remember that it comes in those two different forms. PET. This is a food-safe thermoplastic. It's also one of the most common plastics. It's actually polyester. So it's used for clothing as well as lots of other products, including water bottles, other drinks bottles, packaging. It's impermeable to water, which is a really good property to have, obviously, for some of its uses. It's lightweight, meaning it's not going to add too much additional weight to a product that you want to keep quite light for transport costs. So things like drinks bottles and food packaging are made from PET. Now, on the bottom of a PET bottle, you'll notice the recycling code has the number 1 in the middle of it. That recycling code means it's widely recycled. So most councils in the UK will happily recycle PET. The higher the number, the harder it is to recycle. So I'm not sure what they go up to, but I know that 7, I've seen 7 on some, those plastics are not widely recycled and most likely will go to landfill. Right, we're going to talk about thermosetting polymers now. So these are the ones that have a chemical reaction. Once they are set, they are set. You can't heat them, worse for the environment, but have good properties that make them suitable for uses that may involve heat. For example, plug sockets, pan handles, all that sort of stuff. So, epoxy resin. It is a really good electrical insulator. It's wear resistant, making it really good as an adhesive. You can also see that you can get it as an adhesive with the Gorilla sort of epoxy that we've got at the bottom here, where you've got the hardener and the resin that you mix together in equal amounts. The top right one is called clear casting resin, which has got a slightly different mixing ratio, but you can achieve really attractive products casting things in epoxy resin. Horrendously bad for the environment. You can't recycle it, you can't heat it up, you can't do anything with it. It would either go to landfill or be burnt. So if you're making something from epoxy resin, you need to make sure it's not a throwaway product. It needs to be a quality product that's going to last. because you cannot easily dispose of these types of polymers. Melamine formaldehyde, very, very common, comes up a lot in the exams. The majority of its use is on work surfaces, kitchen work surfaces. In school, a lot of the desks that you work on in school will have melamine formaldehyde on the top. It tends to be a layer, a coloured paper, might be like a fake wood grain effect or just a colour. And then the melamine formaldehyde is a resin that's put over the top, and it sets really, really stiff, really hard. It's very strong, and it's got really good resistance to scratching, staining, but also resistance to heat, therefore making it very suitable for kitchen worktops. It's also quite often used for things like bowls and tableware, because they're so strong, doesn't stain, you know, it's going to be a really hard wearing product. But if you're going to keep anything in your head, remember kitchen work surfaces, melamine formaldehyde. This one's a funny one. I've never ever seen it come up in the exam, and it's really difficult to find uses of this resin. I've had a good look. The main use that I can see is that it used to be used for something called Bakelite, which was one of the earliest commercial polymers. So really old plastic products, kind of like the ones to the top right, which have these kind of dark, rich brown colours, are Bakelite. So for decorative items, sometimes for electrical fittings, sometimes for saucepan handles, because it is a thermoset. But I wouldn't worry too much about this one. I don't think it will come up, but if it did, you would still be able to talk about it's a thermoset, so you can bring in all of those different issues and benefits from it being a thermoset, so resistant to heat, good insulator, problems with recycling, problems with manufacture because it needs such a certain type of manufacturing process. But this type of resin seems to be more specialist. Limited colours are available. It's very, very hard. So products that are made from this type of resin are going to be very, very hard. They're not going to dent or scratch easily. So quite often used for ornaments, things like that, decorative items. Polyester resin. This is quite an easy one. This is often used in glass reinforced plastic. So fiberglass is the common name, kind of the colloquial name for it, just like people will say carbon fiber. You need to remember to call it glass reinforced plastic and carbon fiber reinforced plastic. Make sure you do that in the exam. So polyester resin is basically the resin or the glue that's used with layers of glass fiber, and then it sets rock hard into the shapes that you can see on the screen here. So it's used in boat hulls, car body panels, on slightly cheaper supercars. I know that sounds a bit bizarre, but cheaper sports cars are likely to have glass fiber rather than carbon fiber, which is ridiculously expensive. But it has a lot of benefits, glass fiber, to the same as carbon fiber, that it can be made into lots of variety of different shapes. But the big benefit of polyester resin is it's resistant to UV. So you can see why it would be useful in an outdoor environment, especially in cars and in boats that are going to be exposed to high levels of UV in their general lifetime. This one, bit of a classic one. Don't ask me why it's used for toilet seats. I have no idea, but the most common use for urea formaldehyde is electrical fittings, so plugs, plug sockets. It's a fantastic electrical insulator. It's very heat resistant. Because it's a thermoset, it is not going to soften or change shape. It's going to keep its shape. So urea formaldehyde is commonly used in electrical fittings because of the reasons of it being such a good insulator of both heat and electricity. Right, elastomers. So this is the little part from the specification where it says you need to be able to explain why elastomers are used. Now, I'll tell you what, elastomers come up a lot in the exams. AQA seem to love elastomers. They always give a question about elastomers being used on toothbrushes and things, little thermoplastic elastomer, like grips and things. And there was one on a clothes peg where it had a squashy elastomer grip. There was once a question about silicone oven gloves. So definitely worth making sure that you're happy with these. There was once an 8-mark question about neoprene, which really caught some people out. So make sure that you're happy with these different types of elastomers. So first one being natural rubber. So it comes from rubber trees. It is one of the most flexible types of rubber, and it's very resistant to water, which makes it obviously suitable for things like rubber gloves, footwear, cookware, all those different types of things. It has some downsides though to it. So it does have excellent tear and abrasion resistance. What I mean by tear is that it doesn't easily pull apart, but it's quite vulnerable to chemicals and weather exposure. So quite often other rubber products will have other additives added to them to help them not break down in when they're being used with chemicals. So natural rubber, used for things like rubber bands, rubber gloves, comes from a natural source, which is obviously better for the environment, but it does have slight vulnerability to chemicals and weather, like sunlight, all those different types of things. So butadiene rubber or polybutadiene rubber is a synthetic rubber, so it's a man-made rubber. The main thing you need to think about it is it's actually got some natural rubber in it, but other types of compounds that improve its resistance to abrasion and also other types of chemicals. So this rubber used predominantly on tyres is really abrasion resistant, resistance to cracking along the tread, so the grooves in the tyre. It's also really good in extreme temperatures, good heat resistance. So the more synthetic side of this rubber gives it some different properties. So synthetic, obviously, it's not a natural source it's coming from, so that's going to have an environmental impact. Silicon. Like I said, there was a question quite a while back about why silicon would be an excellent material for a pair of oven gloves. This was actually part of the lesson I gave on that, and you can see that I've listed a few properties that silicon has, which makes it suitable for those types of applications. So silicon is often used in things like electronics, in construction, architecture, kitchenware, but the main thing to think about probably is it being used in the kitchen, and it's got quite a few different types of applications. It's very durable, so it's very wear resistant, it's not going to be breaking down easily. It's got low chemical reactivity, which is great, so it's not going to be reacting with any kinds of ingredients or chemicals, cleaning chemicals in the kitchen. It repels water, meaning it's not going to absorb any moisture into it. One of the issues with it is that it has poor tear strength, so it's relatively easy to tear it, so kind of like in its shear strength is not very good. It withstands high and low temperatures, so quite often baking trays for cakes and things now can be made from silicon, and because it's so flexible, it's very, very easy to get the cakes out of the baking tray, but also it doesn't conduct heat very well, meaning that it cools down very, very quickly as well. Silicon quite often used for ice cube trays, the complete opposite. So it's very happy in high or low temperatures, and massive advantage of ice trays made from silicon is you can literally just flex and pop the ice out rather than having to like bash it on the surface, which is the classic way of getting ice cubes out of an ice tray. Some other really good things about silicon: it's very ergonomic. it's really good for grips. It can be molded really easily. It tends to be relatively expensive, and it's not the best for the environment in terms of it being a thermosetting polymer. Once it's made, you can't reheat it, you can't reshape it, it can't be recycled. So those are all things that you need to bear in mind with silicone. Neoprene. Like I said, neoprene had an 8-mark question on it once in one of the exams. And the question was about a laptop case, and the question asked you about why neoprene was a suitable material for a laptop case. So there's lots of different properties to neoprene. It's a non-toxic synthetic material, and 3 main uses of neoprene. There's loads of different uses, but 3 main uses, things like laptop cases. And the reason for it being used around electronics is that it has fire and static resistance. So it's really, really good at being used around electronics. So you don't want a material that's going to build up loads of static around a laptop or something quite sensitive like a smartphone or something like that. So it's really good for protecting electronics because of this ability to not build up static. But also it's soft, it's going to cushion, it's going to absorb any impacts. So neoprene, in terms of it being used for a laptop case, you've got that static issue as well as the cushioning sort of aspect to the product. It's also very soft. You can add zips and other components to it because it's almost like a fabric. Next one, the reason it's used for things like wetsuits. It's very cold resistant and very heat resistant. So it excels in both very hot temperatures and very low temperatures. So if you think about a wetsuit, it may get very, very cold, and it may potentially get quite hot depending on the heat it may be exposed to potentially. It's resistant to UV, it's chemically resistant, its water and thermal properties help to keep the swimmer or the person warm in the water. So it's got insulating properties, and it can remain flexible at both cold temperatures and high temperatures. I hope that makes sense. Another really interesting feature of neoprene is its flexibility. It can be worn on the body very comfortably because it's got this great ability to keep its shape over time. So it's quite often used to make things like wrist supports, knee supports. So it can be formed into a shape and it will maintain that shape. So that's another positive for the neoprene laptop case. It will maintain that shape. It's not going to lose that shape over time. So that is neoprene. Big warning, that's come up a few years back, but it tends to be quite a favourite of the examiners, so watch out for that one. This is the last one I think we're going to go through today because this video is getting ridiculously long. This is, if you've completely lost the will, this is probably one of the most important slides on the whole presentation, because this is the more environmentally conscious and the better example of a kind of squashy rubberized material. So TPE, or thermoplastic elastomer, is a squashy, soft thermoplastic, but because it's a thermoplastic, it can be recycled. So in contrast to silicone, I spelled that wrong, it should have an E on the end, and rubber, which cannot be heated and reshaped, this can. It can be injection molded, and the properties are very similar to a silicone. It's flexible, it's tough, it tends to be quite tear resistant, which is actually a bit better than silicone. Pigments can easily be added because it's just like a thermoplastic. You can add pigments at any time, and it's quite commonly used for things like TV remotes. So on the back of a TV remote you may have a slightly squashy material where you grip the TV remote. You might have it on a watch strap. So I have a Samsung watch and the strap is made from TPE. Toothbrush grips, headphone, the buds that go into your ears, those are all thermoplastic elastomers, and they are used very commonly in industry now as a more environmentally friendly option to synthetic rubbers and silicone. So I realise that has gone on a little bit, but I hope that gives you a really good overview of all of the different types of polymers, some of their properties, what to look out for, and yes, I hope that was useful. You can see I'm just blabbering away now. I've lost my train of thought, but yeah, I'll see you on the next video. Laters.